Wow. All right. Well, this morning we're going to continue on in our new series that we started on the book of Proverbs. And as we get going in that, just thinking about this last week, about what we have done this week, how we have tried, hopefully, to impart to these kids a little bit more about Jesus, help them to understand the hope and the grace that he has. And so we were trying to think about, I was trying to think about what can we gain from Proverbs that would kind of help us understand a little bit more about kids. And this morning we're going to talk about parents and kids, but I want you to understand that what we're talking about does not solely belong to the realm of parents and kids. We're going to take a look at a couple of different Proverbs, and again, it's going to be a father talking to his son. But throughout this, I want you to understand and I want you to remember that we're not just talking about fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. We're talking about how people relate to other people. We're talking about how we leave something to the next generation. And when I say the next generation, that doesn't necessarily mean age-wise. It just means, there are many generations just right here within this congregation of spiritual generations, right? Some people may be older. When I say that, I mean not a kid, but this is the first time they've come to know Jesus or want to know about Jesus. Or there may be, some of you more wise people that we'll get to later on in Proverbs that have the crown of silver, if you know what I mean. That you are the kind of people that are very mature and have been walking with Jesus for a long time. And so we're just talking about how do we share from one generation to the next. And so as we get into there, we're going to be in the first couple of chapters of Proverbs. We're going to look at the beginning of a couple of different chapters in Proverbs to get the idea of what this father is saying to his son. But as we get into that, there was a father who a few days before Thanksgiving, about 2 or 3 days before Thanksgiving, he called his son. His father just distraught. You could hear the pain in his voice. He called his son, and he said to his son, I hate to do this to you at this time of year. I know Thanksgiving is just a couple days away, but I have to let you know that after 35 years of marriage, I just can't do it anymore. I'm sorry. Your mother and I we can't seem to find a way to make this work anymore, and I know this is heartbreaking to you. I know that this is troublesome to you, but I just wanted to let you know that your mother and I are getting a divorce. And the son, just flabbergasted, was questioning, trying to figure out why his father would be telling him this, why his mother and father would be getting a divorce. It seemed like they had been doing so well for so long. I mean, they've been married for 35 years. And after trying to question his father for a few minutes, he finally said goodbye and hung up. And immediately he called his sister, and he said, Dad just called me, and I have no idea what's going on, but he says Mom and Dad are getting a divorce, and it's terrible, and I don't know what to do. I tried to ask him what's going on, and I just couldn't get any answers out of him, and he just seems miserable. And so the sister says, I'll call you right back. And she hangs up, calls her dad. Says, Dad, what in the world are you doing? How could this happen after 35 years? You guys have been one of the most happy couples I've seen. I mean, I know things haven't been perfect, but you guys have been just a stable rock for us in our lives. Why in the world would you get a divorce now? And the father tried to explain and went through it, and the daughter just said, No, you don't understand. You are not going to get a divorce. I don't care what you say. Do not do anything. You are not going to take another step. Just stop. I am going to get off the phone with you. I'm going to call my brother. We're going to buy plane tickets, and we will be there tomorrow. And you are not going to do anything until we get there, and we can talk this out. Father says, okay. They hang up. Father looks over at his wife, and he says, you owe me $20. Not only did I get the kids to come to Thanksgiving, but they're paying their own way. Parents are interesting because, we want the best for our kids, but sometimes we feel like we might have to do some things a little different to encourage our children to make wise choices. Sometimes we feel like we might need to give them an extra push. How many of you want the best for your kids? Anybody? I see a few hands not raised. No, I'm just joking. We all want the best for our kids, right? We all desire to have them grow up to be the best people, no matter who you ask. I mean, they might say that they want them to be well taken care of. Parents might say, I want my kids to grow up and have a good job or have a stable life. I want my kids to grow up and have a family. Whatever it is, we all as parents or as people who have others in our lives, we watch people around us grow up and mature, and we want the best for them. We desire for them to achieve and to be good people, right? And we go through all kinds of things. We say we want them to be, own their own company, be president. We want them to be happy and healthy. It may not have to do with money or wealth or power or fame, but no matter what we desire for our kids, we want them to be good people, right? Well, this morning, that's what we're focusing on. How do we, or not how, but what are we passing on to the next generation in order to make them good people? And like what we talked about last week with Proverbs and how wisdom is the key, right? Wisdom is not just knowledge, but it is knowledge applied. Knowledge applied, put into practice. That's the whole book here, is all these funny little sayings, all these witty statements, right? It's all about trying to put knowledge into practice. And so these first few chapters, if you take a look, if you notice, chapters 1 through 9 are different than the rest of the book of Proverbs in that instead of being these little pithy statements, instead of being little snippets of wisdom or valuable tips on life, they're actual speeches. And these speeches are from Solomon to one of his sons. And Solomon is trying to take the time to impart to his son the things that he has learned over his life, the things that have been important, that he is, the wisdom he has gained, the understanding he has gathered over, let's be honest, quite a few years of mistakes. And as a parent, just like most of us, we don't want our kids to have to make those same mistakes. We don't want them to have the kind of pain and suffering that we have had. We want them to have the successes that we have had, but we're hoping and trying and pleading to impart these things to our children in order that when they grow up, when we're not around anymore, to help them, to guide them, to pick them up when they fall, that they have something to lean on and rely on. And so, if you want, the first couple of Proverbs are going to be up on the screen here. You can follow along there, or if you need the Bible in the pew in front of you, I'm going to take a look at the beginnings of chapters 2, 3, and 4 of Proverbs to get an idea of what Solomon wanted to say to his son. Chapter 2, starting in verse 1, Solomon writes this. He says, "My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding. Indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and will find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom." Flip over to chapter 3, first few verses of chapter 3. "My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart, for they will prolong your life for many years and bring you peace and prosperity. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and good name in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." And then again in chapter 4, a start of a new speech to his son, Solomon says this, "Listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning. Do not forsake my teaching, for I too was a son to my father, still tender and cherished by my mother. Then he taught me, and he said to me, take hold of my words with all your heart. Keep my commands, and you will live. Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or turn away from them. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is this, to get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. Cherish her, and she will exalt you. Embrace her, and she will honor you. She will give you a garland to grace your head, and present you with a glorious crown. Listen, my son, accept what I say, and the years of your life will be many. When Solomon started trying to put his wisdom and understanding together, when he started collecting all of this good information, right? He wanted to impart this to his sons because, let's be honest, he looked at his own life and the mistakes he had made, and he's got to be looking back at David, his father, and seeing the mistakes that he made, knowing and understanding that he himself, Solomon, had come from one of David's biggest blunders. And he sees the things in his life that he came from, and he thinks, I want better for my kids. I want better for my own children. And that, I hope, is our desire. And not just for our own kids, but I hope our desire is that when we see people, like I said, it's not just about parents and kids, but when we as the church see people outside and we want better for them. We want them to not stumble and fall and hurt themselves. We don't want them to be broken and ashamed. We want new disciples. We want people who we are trying to teach and train up in Jesus to not have to be broken. And so there are 4 things that I think we can gather from these speeches, just taking a look at these beginnings of what Solomon wanted to impart to his sons about wisdom, about life, and about how to do this. Just 4 quick things. I'll try to be super brief this morning, but these 4 things I think, and we could name a lot more, I know, but I think these are probably the ones that we can learn the most about and take away easiest this morning. And the first one is that we have to make it a priority to teach wisdom to our kids. Now, I know that sounds obvious. I know that sounds redundant, but at the same time, I think we don't actually realize what that takes or what that means. When you realize that Solomon, because of the things that had gone on in his life and his father's life, he knew the importance of spending time with his kids, of spending time with his sons, carving out time in his day, in his week, in his month, every year. He made sure that he specifically sat down with his kids in order to teach them these things. Now, I know that we all try to do that. I know that we all have busy schedules. I know that there are things that get in the way, but it is difficult for a lot of people, including myself, to actually make specific time, to set it apart, and not just teach kids knowledge, not just impart to them facts and figures, but to actually give them or help them, encourage them towards wisdom. Not just giving them stuff to know and memorize, but actually sitting down and saying, these are important things to know. How do they affect you? How do they affect the way you make decisions? Sitting down, most of the time I think when we do this, it typically comes in times when kids come home. I know in my own life, kids come home from school upset, angry, crying, whatever. And it's in those moments where we have to say, okay, yes, you got hurt today. So how do we learn from this? How do we grow from this? But what Solomon is trying to encourage his kids, encourage us to do for our own kids, is not just when it's already too late, when they've already been hurt and broken. How do we specifically set time aside to be with our kids and teach them or encourage them towards wisdom? What are we passing on to them? That there's there seems to be a time and a place for this, right? We should be setting specific dates. I've always been told, I know I'm not a perfect parent. I know I make a lot of mistakes, and trust me, my kids will point them out very happily. I know. But you try to listen to other people who have been there. You try to gain their wisdom and understanding. And I've always been told to do things like take your daughters out on dates, right? As a dad, you take your daughters out, just you and one of your daughters, and you spend time with them. Or you not just go and spend time on a sports field with your son, but you actually spend time doing something with them that they enjoy, not that you hope that they can get really good at and make millions so you can retire. But as the adult or as the parent or as a mentor or as a leader in some way or fashion, when you encounter somebody who you are trying to help mature and grow up and make wise decisions and learn wisdom, we have to daily encourage them to do that. We have to find ways of making sure that they are there, because if we don't, it's not going to stick. The thing that I always go back to, or the thing that I kept thinking of as I was reading through this about, trying to spend time specifically, I kept thinking to myself, there are times, probably 10 times a day, where I will get so frustrated at somebody that I don't know. They'll do something stupid in the grocery store, or somebody cuts me off on the road, or I hear somebody make a stupid comment, or you see something that somebody puts on social media or something, and you think, man, who taught this person common sense? Did anybody ever take the time to teach them common sense? Like I said, I feel like I say that 10 times a day, and then as I was thinking about that, I was like, did I ever actually stop? I mean, if I'm going to complain about it, if I'm going to be mad or upset that this person doesn't seem to have any common sense, did I actually take any time to stop and be like, hey, this is probably not a wise choice, not just for you, but for other people? We like to sit there and complain and say, man, those people are boneheaded, those people are just, I know I'm probably going to get in trouble, those people are morons. But at the same time, we never take the chance to stop and say, hey, you know what? We could probably do this better. And not just tell them that they're wrong, but take the time to show them how to do it and improve how they're making choices, those kinds of things. Again, because I am a dad, and because my kids and most of the people that I know that have kids, they play a lot of sports. I always come back to sports metaphors and analogies and all those kinds of things. And so it just made me think, that's the difference between a good coach and a bad coach. As parents, we're supposed to be good coaches that not just tell people, okay, these are the rules of the sport you're playing, these are the things that you have to abide by, but they actually go through them. One of the biggest frustrations that I had with Jeremiah's baseball team this last year was that the coach just kind of assumed that since they'd all been playing for so long that they got the basics of baseball. And it was really frustrating watching them play games that they could have won, but because they hadn't practiced the basics and gone over the basics and reminded them and refreshed them on those things, they made mistakes and they lost. And I know I'm just a dad, and so I always want my son to win, and so I probably am very biased. But at the same time, it just reminds me that as parents, when we see our kids going out and making mistakes or doing things or not doing things that we thought we taught them, it goes back to that idea. Did we go over those things? Maybe once, but did we go over them until they stuck? Did we remind them of them? Did we encourage them to continue reminding themselves of those things, right? We always need to encourage our children towards wisdom. We want them to go towards application of knowledge. We don't want them to just have facts and figures. We want them to know not just about Jesus, but we want them to know Jesus, right? That's why I think in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul writes this. He says, now, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. This is, by this gospel you are saved, and if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you, otherwise you have believed in vain. For what I received I pass on to you as of first importance, right? That's the key thing there, right there. What I received, I pass on to you of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, Peter, and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and to the other apostles. And last of all, he appeared to me also, as to one abnormally born. For I am the least of the apostles and do not even deserve to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was within me. Whether then it is I or they, this is what we preach, and this is what you believe. Paul, writing to this church, is reminding them of what they've already known, the foundations. He's continuing to spur them on, push them on, encourage them to gain wisdom and understanding, not just knowing what the Scripture says, but applying it. And I think that's why he adds that last little bit about himself, right? He wants them to see the application of it. We talk about God's grace. We talk about the forgiveness through Jesus, but it really helps to see how that makes a difference. And Paul's like, look at me. I used to be a murderer, but because of the grace, because of these things that we have gained from the Scriptures, because we believe Jesus is who he said he is, you can see the change. So please don't forget it. Continue on towards taking what you know about Jesus and not just letting it be nice things that you can spout off, but it's something that you gain a relationship with Jesus through. You gain not just a way to pass a test, but you gain a friend. So, we pass it on. We pass on what we've already got, right? That's the idea as a parent, that we are encouraging our kids. That's what Solomon was trying to do. We are pushing them towards, and sometimes unwillingly, I guess, but we are pushing them towards wisdom. But here's the thing. As we do that, we're going to have to desire it ourselves. See, that's the thing that I think trips up most parents or mentors or whatever you want to say you are, because I know maybe not all of you have kids, or maybe not all of you have grandkids, or maybe not everybody has family members that they're raising. But if you are a person that you are trying to encourage someone towards wisdom, it's going to be something that you have to desire in your own life. It's going to have to be something that you all are already going after. A lot of times, again, I know I'm making generalizations, but you can look around in our culture and see it. You can look at different people in our society and watch this happen, where parents want the best for their kids. They want their kids to grow up and be better than they were, or better than what they've been surrounded by. But the things that they're teaching their kids are not things that they themselves have taken seriously. They haven't desired it for themselves. And so kids see that, and they think, if my parents don't really think it's important, why should I? And so you've got to be able to make it a priority in your own life, not just things that you want to teach your kids, but things that you want for yourself, in order that you can experience and apply it and then pass it on to your kids. See, the second thing, so the first thing is that we want to encourage our kids to towards wisdom, right? We want to encourage them to what is wisdom? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? And so we want to encourage them towards that, because if they have wisdom, they'll be able to do all those other things that we want for them. They'll be able to be successful, stable, taken care of, all those things. And so if we're going to pass it on to them, then we have to help them see the value in it. And that's the second thing. We have to help them have a desire for wisdom, have a desire for God, have a desire to be the kind of person God has called them to be. The way that Solomon described it is, seek after wisdom as if it were silver. Seek after understanding as if it were treasure. I mean, do you realize the impact that has? How many of you are treasure hunters? Anybody? Corius. Yeah. Alex, what kind of treasure do you search for? Shiny things. That's exactly it, right? That's what treasure hunters do. They search for shiny things. When I read Solomon's words about seeking after it like it was treasure, it made me think about things like the gold rush in like the Yukon. You guys probably know at least some about the Klondike, right? The gold rush in Yukon, Canada. There were things about it that I had never really realized. I mean, you watch movies and you read books like White Fang, and you think, man, that was crazy. Those were, intense people that would be willing to give up everything. But that's exactly it. Like, when you actually know the stories of these guys, they were literally selling everything they had, moving thousands of miles away. And when they got to, they had to take treacherous journeys. No matter which way you went, you could go up through southern Alaska and get into the Yukon that way. You could go around on the water, and there was a waterway that made it down, was it the Dawson River? I can't remember now, sorry. But there was a way you could take the river all the way up to the base of the trail into the Klondike Yukon goldfields. But the thing that astonishes me is that they would get to the border of Canada, and when they got to the border of Canada, they were met by the Royal Mounted Canadian Police, right? The Mounties. They were met by the Mounties, and they were not allowed into Canada unless they had a year's worth of supplies. Now that, for us, may not seem like a big deal. For them, that meant carrying a literal ton of supplies on their own backs up the mountain. These guys were so driven to find gold that they would literally carry thousands of pounds on their own back up mountains in frozen terrain, be willing to face winters where they wouldn't see other people. They would be trapped by snow and ice. They were willing to risk falling into hidden crevasses. They were willing to fight wild animals. They were willing to face starvation. They were willing to give up their own lives in search of treasure. And that's what Solomon says that we should be inspiring in our own kids. A willingness to give up everything in order to find that little bit of Jesus. That little bit of his hope, his grace, his mercy, his forgiveness, right? If we can find wisdom, living a life that follows after Jesus, that's worth giving everything up for. There are a lot of things that we tell our kids are a good idea or things worth seeking after. We want our kids to have things like a good education. We want them to have things like a good work ethic, or we want them to see the value in themselves. We want them to see the value in being a good person. We want them to have all those things, right? They have to see the importance of it themselves, or else they're not going to succeed at it, though. If we encourage our kids to go off to school, I know a lot of parents struggle with this. How do you get your kids to pay attention in class and get good grades and not just pass tests, but actually acquire the things that they need for life? Because they have to see the value in it. They have to recognize that it's important to them. And again, that goes back to seeing us, seeing our example and knowing that it's important to us, and that will help them desire it for themselves. So, we have to push our kids, encourage our kids. Try to strive to have them find wisdom. And part of that is that creating a desire for it in themselves. So, creating a desire for it in themselves. The third thing is, and this is where it gets difficult. We try to get that desire in them. But the thing is that we have to recognize that wisdom requires some things that we don't always like. Things like humility. Humility plays a major role in gaining wisdom. There are a lot of times when we'll look at somebody, and again, we're going back to my example earlier about how we look at people and we say, man, I wish they had some common sense, right? One of the other kind of statements that we like to throw out there is that we'll see somebody make a mistake, and we like to give them the excuse, well, sometimes people just have to learn it on their own. Or the other way that people like to say it is, some people just have to learn the hard way. Right? We throw out these statements and we think that it makes it okay that these people are making mistakes that others have already made and learned from. But if we are going to seek after wisdom and gain wisdom, wisdom requires humility and understanding that it's okay to actually learn and listen to someone and gain from their experience rather than having to go through all of that on our own. Proverbs 16:31 talks about that silver crown. Gray hair is a crown of splendor. It is attained by the way of righteousness. What Solomon was trying to get across was, at that point, if somebody has lived long enough to get gray hair, you had better listen to them because they had done something right to live that long. They have done something right. And so if they have gotten to the point where they have wisdom and understanding because they have years of experience, why in the world would you put yourself through all that pain and suffering of doing the same things that somebody else has already done? We talk about trying to reinvent the wheel. We try to reinvent the mistake wheel over and over and over again. But what Solomon is trying to get us to understand is if we have just a smidgen of humility, if we can just take on a small part of Jesus' humility and say, you know what, somebody has already done this. Or when somebody comes in and says, hey, you know what, I've been here before, I can help you through this. We like to turn our back and say, I'm going to do this on my own. I need to be able to do this on my own. But if we truly are seeking wisdom, humility will help us say, I'm glad you've done this before. I really don't want to have to pay for that mistake. I really don't want to have to go through that suffering. And we learn from those who have had experience ahead of us. Setting our pride aside, setting our own self-will, our own desires for ourselves aside, and listening to Jesus, who was tempted, who was mocked, who went through all kinds of difficulties and yet still was able to follow after God, who was still able to be the perfect person. I think we could probably learn a little bit from him if we're willing to humbly submit, right? But Jesus even ran into people who were unwilling to learn from others. And because of that, he said that they were slamming the door of heaven in other people's faces. In Matthew chapter 23, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and he says to them, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of God in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to." Jesus is like, look, if you would just stop and listen, learn from people who have experience, stop shutting other people out, this could be a lot easier. The last thing, the fourth thing, is that there are several times in here that Solomon wants his sons to understand that discipline is not a bad thing. And see, this is one of those ones, again, it's a hard one, but discipline is not a bad thing. If you take a look at Proverbs chapter 3, verses 11 and 12, he says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son he delights in." So, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke. This is one of those things, again, I think that culturally we've shied away from because we don't want to hurt people's feelings. We don't want to, we don't want to step on toes. We don't want to get in trouble for being bad parents. And so we run away from discipline. We run away from rebuke. But Solomon says, look, if you are really going to be wise, then you've got to let people who know more than you, who are in charge, who are more experienced than you, correct you when you're making mistakes. So, discipline, this is a two-way street, right? And what I mean by that is that as parents, as adults, as leaders, we have to discipline in a way that does not make kids hate it. We have to use discipline in a way that doesn't make them feel, and again, I know I'm going to sound like I'm trying to soften it too much, but discipline shouldn't make our kids hate what we're trying to teach them, right? It shouldn't make them feel inferior. It shouldn't make them feel like a terrible person, But at the same time, we can't ignore it either, because if we do, then they're going to grow up thinking that wrong things are right, that there is no consequences for actions. Discipline has to be shown in a correct attitude. We have to have we have to show them the right attitude. And I guess what I mean by it being a two-way street is it goes back to that whole modeling wisdom for our kids anyway. When we get disciplined, when we have to deal with, just think about, I don't know, maybe the last time you got pulled over. Hopefully that hasn't happened to any of you, but imagine that you get pulled over. I went to grad school with a friend who was a state patrol over on the East Coast. And he used to tell me all the time about how before he had resigned from the police force to go to seminary, how he would pull somebody over, and it was just to give him a warning. Just say, hey, you know what, your taillight's out, something like that, right? He would tell me how he would pull him over, just walk up and try to start a conversation and say, you know, your taillight's out. And by the end of the conversation, he was writing them a lot of tickets. Because somebody would not be willing or ready to listen to that, it wasn't even really discipline. He would just try to help them out and be like, hey, this needs to be fixed. Just wanted to let you know. And they would talk themselves into a ticket because they wanted to argue with him. They wanted to be rude. They wanted to fight about everything that he had to say. And so by the end of it, he was like, hey, I was just going to help you out, but here's your ticket. Have fun paying that. We as adults tend to be that way. We think that because we're grown up, you know, we don't have to listen to discipline as well. But when our kids see that we are willing to fight discipline, when we don't like being rebuked or told that we're wrong or trying to help us change, then we model that to our kids, and our kids are like, I don't need discipline. I can do what I want. So, these things, right? Encouraging our kids to wisdom, trying to help them understand the value of it and seeking after it, knowing and understanding that humility is a part of gaining wisdom, knowing and understanding that discipline is a part of gaining wisdom. These, again, we can add a lot more things, but these are things that are important that I want us to remember, that Solomon wanted us to remember, about how we pass on the fear of the Lord to our kids. So let me just close with this. Jesus, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, right? In Matthew chapter 7, he says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find it. Knock and the door will be open to you. Imagine being able to impart to our kids the idea that all they have to do is ask Jesus and he will give them wisdom and understanding. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be opened. Can we impart to our kids the idea that Jesus is just waiting for them to ask and he's ready to give them wisdom, understanding, a relationship with him? Verse 9, Jesus goes on, he says, which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. That golden rule, right? If you're willing to ask God for wisdom, all you need to do is ask, and he will help you to be able to treat others the way you want to be treated. But Jesus finishes up with this. He says in verse 13, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Those words from Jesus, I want to hold on to, because I want my kids to know and understand. I don't want them to take the easy road. I don't want them to take the wide road.